Welcome to Castified. Today, we're doing a deep dive, custom-tailored for you, into the really intricate world of human relationships.
It's a huge topic.
Absolutely. We're going to explore the science, the sociology, basically how we connect. Everything from, how our brains pick partners, which is kind of surprising, to family dynamics, which are often misunderstood, and even looking ahead at things like AI and love.
Right. The future landscape.
Exactly. And our mission here is simple. Cut through the noise, distill the key insights from research from experts, and give you a shortcut to being genuinely well-informed on something so, fundamental.
It really is. And you mentioned the brain picking partners.
Yeah.
It's fascinating because our biology plays such a big role, often before we're even aware of it.
That's what I find so intriguing. You're saying my brain might have already picked someone out before I even consciously know it.
In a way, yes. There are really two main brain systems at play. You've got the ancient unconscious limbic system, that's the emotional core. And then there's the more evolved conscious part, the neocortex. They work together, but yeah, often that unconscious system gets a head start. It's processing things instantly.
So how does that even work? Is it just gut feeling, or is it processing actual sensory stuff?
It's definitely processing sensory information. Take smell, for instance, especially for women. Your brain is unconsciously sniffing out genetic compatibility.
Seriously? Like actual sniffing?
Well, maybe not consciously sniffing the person next to you, but studies like the famous T-shirt test showed this. Women consistently rated the scent of T-shirts worn by men with different MHC genes. It's major histocompatibility complex.
Right, the immune system genes.
Exactly. They found those scents more attractive. It's not a conscious thought like, diverse immune system. It's the limbic system nudging you towards genetic diversity.
And that makes sense biologically, especially for women.
It does. Because the biological investment, the cost of a poor reproductive choice, is much higher for the woman. Think pregnancy, childbirth, initial care. So maximizing genetic compatibility for offspring health is a deeper drive.
Okay. What about men, then? What are they unconsciously picking up on?
For men, visual cues often dominate initially. Eye-tracking studies show gazes often go to the waist-hip ratio pretty quickly. That ideal 0.7 ratio, the hourglass shape.
Which is seen across cultures, right?
Yes, cross-culturally attractive.
Yeah.
It's a strong unconscious signal linked to fertility and, interestingly, lower risk of chronic illness. And for women assessing men, it's often the shoulder-waist ratio. Around 1.6 is often preferred.
And what does that signal?
It signals physical strength, protection potential, and it's also linked to healthy testosterone levels, which can correlate sometimes with social or even financial success. It's all part of this rapid unconscious assessment of biological market value.
Biological market value. So when the brain gets a sort of good ping from someone with high value, what happens chemically? Is there a rush?
Oh, absolutely. When that unconscious algorithm flags a potential match, you get a flood of two key chemicals in a reward center, the nucleus accumbens. Dopamine is one.
Motivation.
Exactly. It makes you want to do something, approach the person, take a risk. And the other is oxytocin.
The bonding hormone.
Often called that, yes. It actually helps lower your inhibitions by quieting down the amygdala, your brain's fear center, so you feel more comfortable, more open. Together, they make you more receptive, more plastic, ready to form a connection.
Okay, so that's the unconscious attraction setup. But we're human. The conscious brain must come into play. People say the brain is the sexiest organ.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that.
So how does what someone actually says or their personality shape or even override that initial biological pull?
Massively. The second someone starts talking, your neocortex, especially the prefrontal cortex, gets heavily involved. That's where we process trust, empathy, reciprocity, all the higher social stuff.
And that can just shut down the initial chemistry.
Completely. You could feel that intense biological pull, that dopamine oxytocin hit, but then they say something really unkind, or maybe reveal a core value that just clashes horribly with yours.
Yeah.
And poof, spark gone. Because ultimately, for long-term human relationships, what we seem to value most are things like kindness, creativity, flexibility, humor, emotional intelligence.
Traits that signal a good partner for the long haul. For raising kids, maybe?
Precisely. An adaptable, intelligent partner. It's why studies often show that saying something unkind on a date is like the worst thing you can do. People really prioritize shared values and just basic compassion.
That makes so much sense. Okay, let's shift this to today. Online dating, social media. We hear about things like the ick or the paradox of choice. How does this digital world mess with that attraction dance?
Oh, it complicates things significantly. The ick, for example, that feeling where some tiny detail suddenly becomes repulsive. That seems to be more of a recent social media trend than a deep evolutionary filter. Well, think about online dating. You have very limited sensory information, right? No real sense of presence. So the conscious brain, the prefrontal cortex, might overcompensate, fixating on tiny, maybe irrelevant details.
And ruling people out based on, like, their shoes or something trivial.
Exactly. Superficial grounds.
Yeah.
And then you have the paradox of choice. Dating apps give you this seemingly endless menu of potential partners.
Which sounds good in theory.
But it often leads to decision paralysis. You're overwhelmed, and because there are always more options just to swipe away, you invest less in any one person. It's low cost, low investment.
Like that study where people valued something more if they worked for it?
Kinda, yeah. So people end up going on maybe hundreds of dates, but nothing sticks, partly because the brain is just overloaded, always thinking maybe someone better is next. It turns dating into shopping, not discovery.
Fewer genuine connections, despite more choice. Okay, so from that biological drive in modern dating, let's zoom out. Monogamy. It's the standard in many places, but is it? Well, is it natural for humans? Some sources are pretty blunt, saying no.
It's definitely a controversial area, but from a strict evolutionary biology standpoint, sexual monogamy isn't really the ideal strategy if your main goal is just spreading genes widely.
It limits the gene pool.
Right. And that's why true sexual monogamy is incredibly rare in mammals.
Right.
Like less than 0.002%. We see high infidelity rates in humans too, maybe around 50%, even where monogamy is the strong social norm.
I remember hearing about gibbons, thought to be monogamous apes.
Yeah, my old professor actually studied them. They appeared monogamous, living together, raising young together. Social monogamy, but genetically. Turns out they were sneaking off behind the rock, as he put it. Sexually, not so exclusive.
So if it's not strictly our biological default, why did monogamy become so widespread socially?
Well, it seems primarily it served purposes of social control and predictability. As societies got larger and denser, ruling classes needed ways to maintain order, predict behavior.
Like managing inheritance.
Exactly. Rules about marriage, who inherits property, legitimacy of children. Think Victorian times. These were all ways to structure society and keep things, orderly. But we have to remember it's not universal.
Right. Other cultures have different models.
Absolutely. Look at the Ateka people in the Congo. Fathers are incredibly hands-on, co-sleeping, carrying kids a lot. Or in parts of Nepal, you find polyandry, one woman married to multiple brothers, often for economic reasons like keeping family land intact.
Which brings us to polyamory today. Can you clarify what that actually means?
Sure. Polyamory is about having multiple sexually and emotionally intimate relationships at the same time, crucially, with the full knowledge and consent of everyone involved.
So openness is key.
It's fundamental. And people in polyamorous relationships often argue their approach is actually more moral because it's built on honesty about natural desires, unlike, say, secret affairs within a monogamous setup. It definitely challenges you, the listener, to think about what moral means here.
And does it work? Are people in polyamorous relationships as happy?
Well, here's the fascinating part. Studies using standard relationship satisfaction scales, they find basically no significant difference in well-being or satisfaction levels between people in monogamous relationships and those in consensual non-monogamous ones, like polyamory.
Wow. Okay. But there must be challenges.
Oh, absolutely. Huge challenges.
Yeah.
Societal judgment is a big one, being seen as immoral or cold. And internally, dealing with things like jealousy requires constant, really deep, open communication. It's demanding.
Okay, this makes me think about another relationship dynamic that's often maybe undervalued. Fatherhood. There's this cultural myth sometimes. Fathers as surplus. You argue they're fundamental.
Absolutely fundamental. Not surplus at all. Those myths, dad as just the breadwinner or the disciplinarian or kind of the bumbling secondary parent like, daddy pig.
Yeah.
That's purely cultural baggage, often traced back to the Victorian era, reinforced by media. Biology tells a completely different story.
How so? Do men change biologically when they become fathers?
Profoundly. We see a significant drop in testosterone, sometimes up to 30%, in new fathers. And let me be clear, this doesn't make them weaker.
Right.
It shifts their focus biochemically away from mating efforts towards family, nurturing. And this drop allows other parenting hormones like oxytocin, vasopressin, even prolactin to work more effectively. It actually increases emotional vulnerability, empathy, prepares them for fatherhood.
So they're biologically primed for a specific role. What does that role look like in a child's development? Is it different from the mother's?
It's often complementary and distinct, yes. You could say fathers often scaffold the child's entry into the world beyond the family. They play a big role in developing social skills, emotional regulation, resilience.
How? Through what kinds of interaction?
A classic example is rough and tumble play. Starts around 6 months usually. It's very physical, stimulating play.
Tickling, wrestling.
Yeah, that kind of thing. It's actually a really quick way to bond floods both dad and child with bonding hormones. But it's more than just fun. It teaches kids about reciprocity, empathy, like, oh, that was too hard, and risk assessment, learning boundaries in a safe context.
And dads are sort of wired for this kind of play?
It seems so. What's amazing is research shows fathers and children have kind of co-evolved to prefer it. Dads tend to get their biggest oxytocin hit from playing with the kids, and kids get a peak from playing with dad. It's different from the oxytocin peak moms and kids might get from, say, cuddling or quieter nurturing.
That explains why dad is often the fun one. But you also mentioned fathers are critical right from the start, those first 1,000 days. Why then?
Because human babies are born, relatively speaking, months premature compared to other mammals. Our large brains mean we have to be born earlier, while the head can still fit through the birth canal.
So a lot of brain development happens after birth.
A huge amount, especially in the prefrontal cortex, the seat of social understanding. And both parents' input, right from day one, is vital fuel for that rapid development. Consistent, loving interaction shapes that growing brain.
So what happens if that father figure isn't consistently present? And does it have to be the biological dad?
Doesn't have to be biological or even living in the same house. It's about a reliable, engaged male presence. But growing up without that consistently, the risks are well documented. Higher chances of antisocial behavior, crime, addiction, mental health problems later on.
And does that affect girls too, or mostly boys?
It absolutely affects girls too. Girls with secure attachments to their fathers tend to do better academically, have more career success, better mental health, more stable relationships as adults, and engage in less risky sexual behavior. The impact is profound for everyone.
But the brain is adaptable, right? What about single-parent homes or gay parents?
Incredibly adaptable. The brain's plasticity is astonishing. In single-parent households or households with 2 moms or 2 dads, the primary caregiver's brain often adapts and compensates, showing activity patterns that encompass roles typically associated with both mothers and fathers. It finds ways to meet the child's needs.
That's reassuring. Still, it sounds like rising fatherlessness in many Western societies due to divorce or other factors is a serious issue. And you mentioned family courts might be behind the curve.
They often are, yes. Many legal systems still operate on kind of outmoded ideas, maybe implicitly favoring mothers, without fully grasping the unique and fundamental importance of the father's role, backed by science. This can unfortunately lead to men feeling, and sometimes being treated as, unimportant or secondary.
So what's the takeaway for parents or future parents listening?
I think the simplest advice is, happy parents make happy babies. Prioritize the parental relationship and well-being. And specifically for dads, advocate for things like proper paternity leave. Sweden gives a year, the UK just 2 weeks. That's not enough.
Because it takes time to bond and gain confidence.
Exactly. It can take men around 2 years to really feel fully competent and transition into the parenting role. Flexible work, being present for bath time, reading stories, even baby massage, which releases bonding hormones and can help prevent postnatal depression in dads too. All these things build that crucial bond and competence.
This is all so complex. Let's pivot slightly towards the future and also towards individual differences. How does neurodiversity like ADHD or autism fit into the picture of love and relationships?
That's a really important area. There's actually significant overlap in the neuroscience. The same neurochemicals, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and similar brain areas are involved in both love and conditions like ADHD and autism.
Which means
neurodiverse individuals can face unique challenges in relationships. Differences in executive functions, things like attention regulation, emotional control, working memory can impact how they navigate relationships. Sensory processing differences too, being hyper or hyposensitive to touch, sound, etc.
Can you give an example, like with ADHD?
Sure. With ADHD, there's often a pattern of dopamine seeking. This might lead to impulsivity, maybe jumping into relationships very quickly. There can also be a craving for novelty, which some research suggests might make long-term monogamy a bit more challenging, though the evidence on actual infidelity isn't overwhelming. It's complex.
And things like masking must play a role. hiding traits.
Huge role. Masking, trying to hide neurodivergent traits to fit in, is exhausting and stressful. It makes it incredibly hard to communicate authentic needs and feelings in a relationship. Empathy can also present differently. Maybe hyper-empathy leading to shutdown, or just a different way of processing and expressing it compared to a neurotypical partner.
It highlights the need for understanding individual differences, which also makes me think about attachment styles. How do those fit in, especially now?
Attachment styles, whether you're generally secure or more preoccupied, fearful avoidant, or dismissing avoidant, are shaped by early experiences and massively influence how you approach intimacy, closeness, and perceived threats of abandonment.
And you think modern life might be pushing us towards certain styles?
There's some concern, yeah. Less face-to-face interaction, especially post-COVID, more digital communication. It might be making people generally less comfortable with deep intimacy, potentially fostering more avoidant tendencies. We get quick dopamine hits online, but it doesn't replace the full chemical cocktail of real-world connection.
So talking about your attachment style with a partner could be really helpful.
Immensely helpful. Just vocalizing it. Look, I tend to need reassurance, or I sometimes need space when I'm overwhelmed, builds so much understanding and empathy. It stops you from just reacting based on assumptions.
Okay, final big area, the future. You've hammered home how vital relationships are for health, even more than diet or exercise.
Absolutely. Single biggest factor for health, longevity, well-being, hands down.
But we have digital communication weakening those in-person bonds. And now, things like love drugs and AI relationships are on the horizon.
Right. The landscape is changing. Regarding love drugs, things like synthetic oxytocin, sometimes called oxylove, or even MDMA, are being explored, often in therapeutic contexts, to potentially enhance feelings of connection or trust.
But are they safe? What are the risks?
Significant risks and ethical questions. Oxytocin's effects aren't always predictable. In some people, it can actually increase bias or bigotry. We don't fully know the long-term effects of MDMA or what happens psychologically when you stop taking a drug that induced feelings of love. And then the ethics. Coercion, using it without a partner's knowledge, potential misuse in discriminatory ways. It's fraught with danger.
And AI. People are already forming relationships with chatbots. We hear about AI caretakers, robot partners.
Yeah, that's definitely emerging. And look, AI chatbots might have some benefits, maybe practicing social skills if you have anxiety.
But can they replace human connection for our well-being?
Scientifically, based on what we know now, no. Current AI simply doesn't trigger the necessary cascade of positive health-boosting chemicals in our brains because, fundamentally, our brain doesn't register it as a real sentient human connection.
There's something missing physiologically.
Exactly. There's a concept called biobehavioral synchrony. When humans are deeply connected, parent-child, romantic partners, close friends, their bodies literally synchronize. Heart rates, breathing, body temperature, even brainwave patterns and neurochemical levels can align. We become like one organism, physiologically.
Wow.
AI, being a dry system, not a biological wet system, cannot replicate that deep synchrony. It can mimic conversation, maybe even emotional expression, but it can't provide that fundamental physiological co-regulation that seems so crucial for our health and sense of deep connection. The complexity of brain activation seen in human love, especially involving the limbic system, is just far beyond what current AI can elicit or replicate.
So wrapping this all up, it's incredibly complex, from our unconscious biology to societal structures to future tech.
It really is. And maybe a final thought for everyone listening to ponder. Given how incredibly adaptable our brains are, how we can thrive in different family structures, yet how fundamental that real human wet system connection is for our basic health. How can you, personally, proactively prioritize and really nurture your authentic in-person relationships, especially now in this fast-paced digital world? How do you make sure your brain gets the kind of interaction it truly needs to flourish?
That's a powerful question to leave us with, a lot to think about in our own lives and relationships. Thanks for listening to Castified.